Welcome to the Momentum Lifestyle Podcast, where we interview an inspiring, educational, and entertaining guest to help you build confidence, find balance, and live a life of impact. We'd like to thank our sponsor today, Spunky. Now, Blake, Genoa, and myself have been using their Reboot product for well over 6 months now, and it has been life-changing. I found myself recovering faster, having way more energy throughout the day, and honestly feeling just more jacked up as a man. And this is because Reboot is clinically formulated to support healthy male hormone levels, providing stress relief, improved strength and stamina, enhanced drive, and overall well-being. Spunky Reboot contains a proprietary blend of 10 natural and organic herbs and active ingredients that are renowned for helping men to enhance physical and cognitive performance, improve stamina, energy, and endurance, optimize testosterone levels, support healthy reproductive function, support cardiovascular function, relieve stress, mild anxiety, irritability, relieve tiredness, fatigue, support healthy sleep patterns, and support healthy body weight. So as you can see, it is a must-have product for all men. So head to their website, bespunky.com.au, that's bespunki.com.au, and use the code MOMENTUM to receive 10% off all Spunky products.
Dr. Wednesday Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am very excited to talk all things sex, sexuality, true sex, wild sex, everything in between.
People are.
Yeah, who isn't? But before we get started on that, can I get you to give a little 60 to 90 second intro on you, your work, and how you ended up where you are now?
Sure thing. I'm Dr. Wednesday Martin, and I am a social scientist and storyteller. And I have a background in cultural anthropology, which is the comparative study of human societies, and evolutionary biology. Most people know what that is, just the biology of evolution, and primatology, which is the study of our closest non-human primate relatives, monkeys and apes. So what I like to do is I take data from these different fields and I wrap it up and make it delicious, and I cross it over into the mainstream. And lately I've been doing it with data about sex. And my goal in life really is to use data, make it relevant and delicious, and help set people free, help people feel less weird in this instance about their sexuality, help them feel more comfortable in their bodies, help them feel more comfortable with their desires. I want to use social science to help people understand why they want what they want, why they feel what they feel, why they do what they do. That's my jam.
I think that's the best intro I've had so far. And I must say that from my experience, you make data as sexy as anyone could possibly make it, which you've done very well on that.
Thank you. I was just trying to make it. Thank you. I was just trying to make it delicious, but if I made it sexy too, that's great. And I want to say that I'm so glad to be on the Momentum podcast. I'm so slow that I only recently realized that it meant that it's especially for men. So this is such a great opportunity because while I've focused on female sexuality full-time for the last 6 years, after focusing on it for many decades before, I always like to say that, like, when we misrepresent women sexually, we are misrepresenting men sexually too. So I'm always so glad to talk to men and to invite men to be part of my audience.
Hey, we're just a couple of blokes trying to make sense of women. So any insights you've got, we're here for it.
Great.
Let's kick off with you did a lot of research and on women's sexuality in your book Untrue, and it blew me apart as probably as strongly as I'm guessing and suggesting that a lot of people kind of blown apart with what you found in it. But what have we been led to be told, I guess, that's untrue when it comes to sex and sexuality?
A lot of things, but there are a few main things that people, even doctors, right? Even medical doctors, even scientists, even sexologists are still getting wrong. And the reason for that isn't particularly, that people are horrible or there's some plot. It's more that science is ever shifting and changing. And when there's science that seems to confirm what we think we already know, it tends to stick, right? And we call that confirmation bias. Now, sexuality, you can see, is so personal and so political at the same time that it is probably the field of endeavor and study that is most vulnerable to confirmation bias. And that has been the case. So let me just talk about how we got some of these untrue ideas about female sexuality, especially, and then where they are. Probably one of our biggest problems is somebody who's my hero, Charles Darwin, who asserted in the mid to later 19th century, based, he said, on his observations across animal species. Now Darwin gave us the theory of evolution. He gave us the theories of both natural selection and sexual selection, which go hand in hand to help creatures and things evolve. So those were great contributions. A not so great contribution to his theory on sexual selection was this idea that he developed, which when you hear it, you're going to be like, that sounds very Victorian. What a funny coincidence. But Darwin had this idea that males of most species, he said, are basically randy and assertive. And he said females of most species are basically, he said they were coy and reticent. What he meant was not as interested in sex, trying to get away from it. Okay. Now, we can't really blame Darwin. He was, a product of his time at the same moment that he was a great scientist. Also, this is kind of a sidebar, but what people don't really understand is that Victorians weren't just these asexual, repressive people. Victorians were like obsessed with sex. Like we think of them as, oh God, we Victorians were so repressed. But Michel Foucault wrote a great book called The History of Sexuality. And one of the things he got into was how, God, Victorians developed these like elaborate, like hierarchies of sexuality and all these names. They invented the term trividism for lesbianism. They categorized every fetish and preference, and so there's a level on which Victorians were obsessed with sex. They also did have this gendered division of labor, and I call it a gendered division of everything, in which women were supposed to be at home, men were supposed to be out in the world. And there was this new consolidation on this idea of marriage as the locus of all your sexual satisfaction and all your emotional satisfaction. Okay, so this is an important thing to know about Victorian culture, in Western Europe and the United States at this time. Darwin comes along and he says this thing that just comports so perfectly to the idea of men out in the world smoking cigars and women home overseeing the help and being the help. This thing about courageous, pugnacious, randy males and coy, reticent females, and everybody gloms onto it, right? And to this day, I praise and curse Darwin for how he has fucked men and women over with that assertion. But he couldn't do it in a vacuum. He needed generations and generations of buy-in, and that's what we had. Even after World War II, in spite of what we were seeing in the field, even after World War II, this English geneticist named Angus Bateman did some studies of fruit flies. And the way that the studies, Drosophila melanogaster, for people who care about Latin names of fruit flies. So he did these studies and he found out, he said that fruit flies, the males benefited from having several mates. If the males mated with several females, he said, their reproductive success, right? The number of offspring that they have that will survive to reproduce, which is our metric for reproductive success, they really enhance their reproductive success if they have lots of partners. Females, on the other hand, according to the way Bateman's study was communicated, females, on the other hand, they do not benefit at all from mating multiply, right? They're just, they have the number of, and nothing's going to get better if they mate multiply. So you could see Bateman building on Darwin, which everybody had already been like, oh yeah, he's right about men and women. Bateman builds on this, and you can see how people literally think. They sort of concur based on what Darwin has said and what Bateman purports to have found. And they say, yeah, naturally, like if the males benefit, if they enhance their reproductive success by being promiscuous, and the females do not enhance their reproductive success by having more than one mate, by mating multiply or being promiscuous, then naturally, male fruit flies are hornier than female fruit flies, and they're designed to go out and nail as many female fruit flies as possible. And female fruit flies are naturally designed to like sit in the bar and file their nails and wait for somebody to buy them a drink and have one baby at a time with one guy at a time. Well, that turned out to be totally untrue. Even in Bateman's original study in 1948, if you go back to it, it actually says that female fruit flies benefit from mating multiply. But this finding went so against our core assumptions about who females and males were. Forget about female fruit flies and males. We like to generalize everything, right? So we had Darwin saying this happens across all species. Males are horny, girls are angels. And then you have Bateman come along. I always say, oh, how suspicious that Bateman comes along and says this is how fruit flies are. Like, right as in the United States, we're trying to shove women out of the workforce and back into the home, right? With the GI Bill and all the GIs come back. The women have been running the show. They've been running factories. They've been having affairs with other women. They've been having affairs with men. They've had total autonomy. And then all of a sudden, oh, what a coincidence. In 1958, the war is over and we need men to go back to their factory jobs and men to be the bosses again. And bam, we have this science that's all about how girls are demure and guys are sexual bosses. Wow, isn't that convenient? Okay, so I'm trying to make a point about how science and society intersect and create your actual sex life that you're allowed to have. So it turns out, though, that Bateman admitted, sorry, I am just moving my chair and making noise here. It turns out that Bateman had actually found that females did benefit from mating multiply. Nobody looked at that until very recently, when Patricia Goatti said, wait, hold up. I'm a female and I mate multiply. I don't want to put words in her mouth. But after Bateman, we had a whole generation and a generation and a generation of women go into science in Western Europe and across the world. And these women went into science, and a lot of them felt the way that I did when I was an undergraduate. When I was an undergraduate and I was told that females didn't mate multiply, but males did, because females didn't benefit from it. I wanted to stand up and look around, and I really wanted to say, like, either I'm not a female or something's wrong here, because I'm a female and I mate multiply and my girlfriends mate multiply, and we're doing it because it feels good, right? Now, little did I know, I was just a little undergraduate at the University of Michigan listening to, I don't know who it was. I studied with Richard Wrangham and Barbara Smuts. And I don't know who it was who was in this lecture talking about Bateman's finding and talking about how males were naturally promiscuous and females were naturally monogamous. Suffice it to say that I couldn't square it with my own behavior. And neither could a lot of female scientists. They could not square this, quote, scientific knowledge, unquote, with their own actual lived experience. And just as importantly, they couldn't square it with what they were seeing in the field, because this is what they were seeing. They were seeing female monkeys and apes sometimes take their lives into their own hands to have the thrill of mating with a male unknown to them. They saw females of every mammal species mating multiply. They saw avian species, females of various avian species, birds, you guys, that they were sure were like lifelong partners and were monogamous. And they saw these females going off and getting some, right? And they said, wait, we have to revisit this idea based on these data. And what we ended up seeing, thanks to these field scientists, thanks to Patricia Gowady saying, wait, did anybody ever replicate Darwin's study? Like, I'm sorry, did anybody ever replicate? I misspoke. She says, we based this whole thing about randy men and you know, women being nuns on Darwin, but also on Bateman. And what she said, I misspoke, was, did we ever replicate Bateman's study? And she tried to reproduce Bateman's study. And what she found was female Drosophila melanogaster do benefit from mating multiply. All right, that seems like a little thing. And maybe it seems like a little thing that a bunch of female field biologists and primatologists and medical doctors and sociologists were finding that, duh, women mate multiply. Women have sex with multiple partners. But it was a huge thing, and we're still having a fight because the notion that men are more sexual than women isn't just about sex. It's about being assertive. It's about having a libido, literally and figuratively. It's about having a will to power. It's about rightfully being the person who goes out in the world, legislates laws, enforces them, and another group of people who sit by the hearth and experience them and are on the wrong side of power. That's what was at stake with that science. And that's why I'm so delighted to cross over that idea that women are naturally less sexual than men, that men were designed to spread their seed and women were designed to just have this one choosy egg and lock guys down. Those foundational ideas have been blown out of the water by at least 4 decades of science. And the problem is that we're not crossing it over. We have TV shows that show that men are in the end more sexual than women, or at least that show that like women who have sexual adventures, you know, wind up dead, which unfortunately in a lot of ecologies they do. We have novels, you know, still where men are running the world. And in most countries, men still are running the world worldwide. And in a lot of places, including the United States, Australia is better off than we are. But in the United States, we still have an extraordinary disparity in male versus female labor force participation at the highest levels and male versus female political participation at the highest levels. So we have some disparities of actual lived experience that spring directly from this science. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. So the most untrue thing is that men are more sexual than women. And the second most untrue thing is that because of that, monogamy is easier, natural for women and unnatural for men. That was a very, very long answer to your wholly reasonable question.
Whether it was long or short, the energy that you put into it is so entertaining that I was fully encapsulated by everything that you had to say.
You know, here's the thing. What could be more entertaining and awesome and amazing than sexual science? And I'm just mad that it has been rendered so biased and boring. So I'm on a mission to cross over new, accurate social science to change the lives of men and women and people who don't identify as either. But I would say those are the 2 big things. And in Untrue, I get into great detail about why men weren't designed for promiscuity and women weren't designed for monogamy, even though men have a bunch of sperm and women have 1 monthly egg. That doesn't mean anything. So people who want to get into detail about that can. What I do want to say, they can read my book. But the other thing that I want to say is, you know, we now have ways of measuring the male and female libido. So a lot of people were like, oh yeah, well, like science shows that men were designed to mate multiply and they're made that way and it's natural, and women were made this other way, so it's natural that they are more sexually, quiet. Words kind of fail me at this point in the pandemic. So then they hitched on another notion. Well, that's because, and also as a result of that, men have higher libidos, right? Which, like I said, when we talk about libido, we're never just talking about libido. We're talking about life force. We're talking about will to power. We're talking about legitimate right to run the world. That's one of the things that we mean when we say libido. So energy, right? Just like go out and get itness. So we had decades and decades and decades and decades and centuries of us saying, men just have higher libidos than women do. Like, we know that from the science, and rah, 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 rah. And it was like a sacred cow. Like, I'd go to these sex research conferences, and some people would still be saying it. But, thank goodness for the female primatologists who saw these female apes, mating with, a female chimp mating with 10 male chimps in a row. And instead of saying, wow, those male chimps are really like killing it over there in that like gangbang scene. Instead, they said, wait, the female chimps are seeking this out and initiating these multiple copulations. What's going on there? And it was because it benefited them. It benefited their reproductive success, and they got a lot of benefit out of it. So kind of, put that kind of to the side, that female primatologists were finding this. And at the same time, there was this awesome sex researcher named Rosemary Basson in Canada. And she was working with couples, and like a good sex researcher, and she had been taught her whole entire life that desire is like the male penis. Like, there's excitement, arousal, and then it goes to like completion, ejaculation, right? That's the Masters and Johnson linear model of sex and sexual satisfaction and desire. And Rosemary Basson was seeing something very different. She was doing field work with couples. They were coming to her, the heterosexual couples were telling her, she was listening to them, and she kept expecting to hear that the women didn't have a sex drive and the men did. And she was hearing something very different. She was hearing that women had desire. It was just a slightly different model. And she came up with this circular model, right? And if you care, you can Google it and learn more. But the important part here is that Rosemary Basson was like, wait, there's this thing called spontaneous desire that's like, pew, here to here. But then there's this circular model, and I'm going to call that responsive desire. And it's like, you're not in the mood, and then somebody goes like this to you, and you're like, ooh, now I'm in the mood, right? Or like, I see like a bottle of wine, and I'm like, oh, the last time I had a glass of that wine, I really had a fun time with like 3 guys or whatever, my boyfriend or my husband or whoever I am having that association. So Rosemary Basson came up with the idea, and a lot of sex researchers then noticed that if they accounted for responsive desire, male libido, now if you just look at spontaneous desire, here's male libido up here and here's female desire. Now start looking at responsive desire, and it goes like, ooh. Now factor in that women at different points in their menstrual cycle, and there's debate about this. I come down firmly on the side of when women are ovulating, they feel more sexual desire. I believe there are enough persuasive data that I'm going to throw my hat in there. Okay, so now different times you're on your period, we're up here. Okay, so it's normal that female and male libidos are pretty much balanced. There are exceptions when people have problems, but to me, more often than not, the problem is the cultural container for women. But now, the most amazing thing is that recently, another Canadian researcher, and I like to say, well, there's something in the water in Canada that you have all these awesome female sex researchers. Somebody named Meredith Chivers came up with an instrument to actually measure responsive desire. And now we know for a fact that the male and female libido are pretty closely matched. And it doesn't make sense to talk about big differences between one and the other. And yet it remains a sacred cow of sex research. And older sex researchers, men and women alike, will tell you, it's a hill that some people are willing to die on, So that is, the idea that men have stronger libidos than women, we know that that's untrue as well. Yeah. So throw in the junk heap the idea that men are more sexual than women naturally. Throw in the junk heap the idea that men have a harder time with monogamy in the aggregate than women do. We can get into that later because they don't. And throw into the dustbin this notion that the male libido is higher and stronger than the female libido. All these changes have happened in the last decades, but it's like nobody told us, you know? And part of the reason that nobody has told us is that it's really hard to communicate science that goes against the grain of our everyday lives and that goes against the grain of who we think men and women are sexually. Because when we're talking about who women and men are sexually, we're talking about who they are as people, not just who they are as sexual beings, but who they are essentially at their core as beings. And it is a very disruptive idea, even when it's based entirely in data. Descriptively verifiable, strong, good data that men are no more sexual than women, that men in the aggregate probably struggle with monogamy less than women do, and that men do not have stronger libidos than women. We have lots of data to support this, but we still have a hard time accepting it as a culture in the industrialized West.
Brilliant start. Very happy with that as a summary. So,
okay.
I'm interested even in your personal experience, and you've given a lot of the credit to different researchers over the years.
Yeah.
But I
so many good ones.
also think a lot of credit goes to people like yourself, obviously as a researcher, but also a lot of credit goes to the people who are willing to honor and acknowledge their own experience, as opposed to going like, well, everyone's telling me I should do this. Maybe I should, the people that were exactly as you said, yourself being one of them, who were like, fuck, that's not my experience at all. Like, that seems like bullshit. And then obviously you've taken it to a different level to go and explore it. But there's a lot of like, that's amazing to go against the grain and go, nah, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like my experience. So there's a lot to be said for that.
It's interesting, because on the one hand, I am driven to absolute like frustration by like some of my followers on social media who are younger than I am and who think that everything is about their experience, right? Any data that contradict their experience have to be wrong, or it hurts their feelings or whatever. It drives me absolutely insane. Like every single point about sex research is not there to validate who you are. A lot of people have different experiences, and that's an important point. But so sometimes when people get into this my personal experience thing, or like it's like, I'm sorry you don't like science. Like this is what the science is. Even though science is biased, and my whole thing is that I seek out deliberately science that corrects confirmation bias. Okay, so sometimes I get pushback from women about, like, say, for example, only significantly less than 20% of women. So less than 1 in 5 women, and in some studies, way less than 1 in 5 women. Only 1 in 5 can have an orgasm from penetration alone, right? Sometimes I post that. It sets a lot of women free. It sets a lot of men free. A lot of penis havers are like, that's a relief. And a lot of women are like, oh, thank God there's nothing wrong with me. But then there's this cohort of women who are like, no, I can. I think a lot more women can than that. But hey, I know it's super personal, but science is not about your personal experience every single time. Now, that said, a lot of really good science I learned from somebody I consider a mentor of mine, Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy. She's a wonderful evolutionary biologist and author, and she's brilliant. And she told me when I interviewed her for Untrue, she said, sometimes when I would come to like a fork in the road, or I had to come down on one side or the other, when I was thinking through sexual selection theory or thinking about maternal strategies among human women, and I had to kind of figure it out, and the data could lead me in either direction. Sometimes, she said, I would go based on my own personal experience, right? So for example, about her personal libido, right? She said, well, my menstrual periods are normal. My pregnancies were normal. I'm going to presume that my libido is normal and that it is normal for women to not necessarily only be and feel monogamous. That is a huge leap forward in science based on personal experience. Just we have to avoid this thing where people think that everything they experience has to be validated by science or the science isn't valid. That drives me crazy. Stop doing that. I took us on a tangent.
I like it.
Yeah.
And
Get us back on track.
I forgot where I was going after that. But
oh, great.
No,
I've
got it. So
okay, great.
I'd be interested in your views on the patriarchal fear of the female that's free and autonomous, because I can't help but think that plays a big part in what appears to be quite a bias selection of research and the shaming of female sexuality and everything else that's happened over 100, 200, however many year period. Talk me through it.
Yeah, let's talk about this. First of all, let's define patriarchy. Okay, because a lot of people are like, that's a hazy term. There's no patriarchy. Prove it. I hate those Reddit threads. Why do I always fall for this shit on the internet where like my son who's 20 will send me, Mom, can you believe the way these guys are talking about women? And of course I fall into the endless Reddit thread and I'm gasping for air at the end. But okay, here's the deal. A lot of people will say there's no patriarchy, prove it. Or some anthropologists even will say, well, like patriarchy, you know, that's a really hazy concept. We can't buy into that. It's really simple. Patriarchy is a really simple thing, and I'm going to define it right now. Patriarchies are places and mindsets where there used to be, and maybe still is, patrilineal descent, which means descent goes down or went down through men. Patrilineal naming processes, women take their husband's last name, babies take their dad's names, not their mom's. All right. And where there were, or maybe still are, patrilocal living habits and practices, so that women tend to leave their families and go live with their husbands and their husbands' kin. And that, until very recently in the United States, was a big thing. Same with a lot of Western Europe, Australia. So those mindsets persist. Now, patriarchies are places and mindsets where there used to be or are patrilineal and patrilocal patterns, and where there are descriptively verifiable discrepancies between male and female wage earning, male and female meaningful political participation. I'm not talking about the treasurer of the fucking PTA. I'm talking about the president of the World Bank. And meaningful levels of meaningful political participation. And I'm not talking about, being the city commissioner, although that's wonderful. I'm talking about being the president of the fucking United States, about a woman being the most powerful man in the world. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So far, check. My country for sure checks all those boxes. So the next time somebody tells you that patriarchy doesn't exist or it's not real, you can tell them actually it's a descriptively verifiable thing based on data. People need to hear that because they think, oh, that's just an ideological concept. Nope. It's a sociological and anthropological reality, not some linguistic fantasy that a bunch of feminists made up. Okay, the patriarchy is real.
Can you remember my question? Because I can't. Oh, yeah.
A little bit. Okay. So I said, okay, you wanted to know about sort of the patriarchal oppression of female sexuality, which is like a huge topic. So first I had to define patriarchy.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So a lot of people tell me, oh, why don't you shut up? Basically, they tell me, why don't you shut up? The United States is a great place to be a woman. What are you complaining about? What are you going on about? At least you don't live in Sudan. At least there's not forced female circumcision, or some people call it female genital mutilation in the United States.
That sounds like a gaslighting of some sort.
Yeah, at least women are allowed to be CEOs. And I'm like, there are probably like this many female CEOs of Fortune 100 companies right now, or maybe this many, or maybe this many, or many this many. That's not enough. Second of all, doctors in the United States performed clitoridectomies on girls that they considered too sexual, girls who were masturbating into the late 60s in this country, okay? And so that was like medically approved practice. So don't tell me we don't have, a history of literally making damaging physical abusive interventions into women's sexuality here. We're not Sudan, but nor are we Rwanda, Burundi, Cuba, Belarus, or any of the other places that rank way above my country, the United States, for meaningful labor force participation and meaningful political participation. When you rank the United States, which people are constantly saying is the best place in the world to be a woman, when you rank it worldwide, when you do what I do, and you look at worldwide ethnographic data, and you look at metrics about are women really empowered or not, back to those metrics, labor force and political participation. I'm not talking about being a maid. I'm talking about being the boss of the company. We're happy to let women be maids. We're not really that happy letting them run the World Bank, as I said. And the other metric, political participation. All right. On those metrics, the United States recently ranked 100 out of 200 ranked countries. It should come as no surprise that in a context where women don't have power, women's pleasure is not prioritized. We prioritize the sexual pleasure of whoever is running the show. Now, let's think about how we define sex in the United States and in Australia. How do you think most people define sex?
I'm probably complicating this more than I need to, but
when you think of sex,
two people having intercourse.
Yes, that is what most people think sex is. Guess what a man's most reliable route to orgasm is?
Sex.
Intercourse.
Yep.
Guess what a woman's least reliable route to orgasm is?
Based on your data. Yep.
Okay. And how do I know that? I know that because it's what people say, that sex equals intercourse. And I know that we prioritize male pleasure because we live in an ecology where men have higher rates of meaningful political and labor force participation. So we're going to prioritize their pleasure. So we're going to define sex not as a woman's most reliable route to orgasm, but as a man's most reliable route to orgasm. That's why intercourse equals sex. If we in the United States and in Australia, if we had female president or prime minister after female president and prime minister for decades, I guarantee you that the definition of sex would be what gets women off. Sex would be oral sex, cunnilingus, which is one of women's super reliable routes to orgasm, or vibrators would be considered sex. Real sex. We would define real sex as what got women off if women were in power. Men are in power, and that is why we define real sex as intercourse, because that's men's most reliable route to pleasure. And we prioritize male pleasure because we prioritize men who have power. That is why female sexuality is, as you put it, oppressed in patriarchal settings. I hope that was clear.
Right? I liked it.
Yeah, the people in power, whoever's in power, you will see their pleasure elevated and even fetishized. Like, think about porn. Some of us enjoy porn. And what ends literally every heterosexual snippet of porn that we've ever seen?
A bloke coming everywhere.
The bloke. I'm going to start using the term bloke. I like it. Yes, the cum shot. And the cum shot is not the woman having an orgasm. The cum shot is the guy, yes, ejaculating. Because real sex is the penis, and real pleasure is the penis ejaculating, because male pleasure is real pleasure. And you learn everything from porn, except how to get a woman off, and accept the truth about like squirting and the truth about sex. But you learn everything about the underpinning social conditions producing porn by watching porn. Yeah, yep. So porn is about male pleasure, but only because our entire culture prioritizes male pleasure, because our entire culture prioritizes men. Duh.
So, talking of pleasure, power,
yes,
true sex and wild love. Fuck, I find you, when you and Whitney are working together, fascinating. Love just the liberated freedom that comes in your expression. What does that look like for women, obviously, and I guess with so many blokes listening to this, what can they do to create an environment where the suppressed can finally be liberated and free?
Okay, well, what a great fun question. Yes, so Whitney Miller, my co-hostess, and I did a podcast called True Sex and Wild Love for a couple of years. It was a lot of fun. And so I love your question about, what would it look like to take these data and these insights from social science and science that we want to use. What would it look like if we really used those data to unfetter people from beliefs about themselves and beliefs about their sexuality that were hampering their ability to be fully human and enjoy full pleasure? I think one of the most important things is for people to have access to data that really describes who they are sexually, rather than who they're supposed to be or who we used to think they were. So I think access to relevant data is a really important thing. Reading newer, relevant, accessible data about who women and men are sexually is going to be a really important thing to having an unfettered, pleasurable sexuality. I wrote an article for The Atlantic, for example, called Women, the Bored Sex. And in it, I dove it, don't get offended, straight men. But in it, I wrote about how women in the aggregate, we have ample data showing us that women in the aggregate, there are exceptions. Monogamy is a tighter shoe for them sooner than it is for men if they're in a long-term cohabiting relationship. And there are lots of data, and people always freak out about that and get so mad at me.
What is it they freak out about? And I was also interested in what you said about don't be offended. What's the story that blokes are playing based on that?
Well, if you tell men that their female partners
are bored,
didn't just go off sex because they're less sexual, they're just as sexual as you, they actually went off sex because sooner than you in the aggregate, sooner than men in the aggregate, women in the aggregate lose interest in sex in a long-term exclusive cohabiting relationship.
Brilliant.
Okay, if you tell men that, you're not just upsetting their sense of who they are as men or who these women are as women and as sexual beings. You're upsetting the whole world order for them and their privilege. Now, some guys, to their credit, are like, whoa, wait, like my girlfriend's more of a freak than I thought. That might not be the case in every instance, but when you tell people, for example, when Women the Bored Sex ran in The Atlantic, I heard from a lot of people, including men, who said to me, this helped me so much because I thought my wife didn't like me anymore. I thought I was doing something wrong sexually. I thought there was no cure for this, and my wife had gone off sex forever. And then I said, and what I came to understand was that my wife, like a normal human woman, just gets bored of, partnered long-term exclusive sexual arrangements sooner than I do as a man. And so there's hope. Nobody's doing anything wrong. I'm not failing her. She's not failing me. This is not just what we're dealing with. This is actually normal. This is like how it is. And think of do you know how many women I know who have blown up their marriages, or I've heard from, they've blown up their marriages because we got to stop talking so much about straight people. We'll talk about queer people in a minute because it sounds so heteronormative right now. But straight people do have a particular problem, which is nobody has told them it's normal for female desire to go, woo, in years 1 to 4, to just drop down really dramatically between years 1 to 4, whereas the guy in a long-term exclusive cohabiting partnership, his sexual desire will ebb more slowly over 9 to 12 years, and a woman's will just plunge within years 1 to 4. What if we told people that? What if people went to couples therapists, and instead of the couples therapist saying, well, this is a problem, female libidos are just lower. What if the couples therapist actually knew the fucking deal with the science and said, oh, okay, here's the awesome news. This is totally normal. She's in her normal years 1 through 4 drop. This is normal. Congratulations on being normal. And this is fixable. She just is a normal human woman, and she has more of a need sooner for variety and novelty and adventure in her sexuality than you do. And I'm sure I get into all the evolutionary underpinnings of why women in the aggregate need variety and novelty and adventure more than men do. We all need it, but women need it more. If you want to read about why, read my book on truth. Here's what I'm trying to say. If only people knew this science, it's not just that they would help people feel better. It is that they would normalize what people are deeply ashamed of and troubled by. They would set these people free, and they would save so many relationships. If they would just destigmatize, let's uncouple female sexual dissatisfaction in a long-term exclusive cohabiting relationship from male performance. I beg you, if you are a guy and you have a girlfriend or a wife who is, I hate to say this, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but in the end, this is going to be good.
Go for it.
Okay. She's bored sooner than you are, according to science. Now, she might be different. There are exceptions, but in the aggregate, the most likely scenario is if you're you're a guy, move in with your girlfriend, love her, things are hot as can be. You're going to notice that she is not sexually interested sooner than it happens to you. And you're going to think, yeah, because women are less sexual than men. Do you remember what I told you about the science of libido? They're not less sexual than men. So what if, when that happens, instead of thinking it's about your performance or something you could do better, I guarantee you that unless there's a medical issue, I am pretty confident based on data that your girlfriend who has gone off sex, if I interviewed her, and I did what the sex researcher at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Marta Miana did, these women came to her. They said, oh my God, you have got to help me. Like, something's really wrong. And she's like, really, what's wrong? And they're like, I do not have a libido. When I tell you that I used to be a horn dog, and I used to get it, and I used to have fabulous orgasms and a fabulous sex life, so happy with my sex life. And now I don't have libido anymore. And I love my husband so much, but I just don't want to fuck my husband, or I just don't want my husband to go down on me, or I just don't want to have sex with my husband anymore. She's like, oh God. And they're really troubled. I love him. I can't, I feel so bad. I'm so unhappy. My libido is gone. Help me get my libido back. Marta Miana holds up a photo of a hot guy. I like to imagine he's like, whatever the woman's idea of hot is. Cut abs, okay, that's what he's got. Big dick, okay, that's what he's got. Really sexy smile, okay, that's what he's got. Says, what if you could have sex with this guy? This is an actual scientific study. And the women are like, oh yeah, it's on. Yeah, okay, where, when are we doing it, right? She doesn't have a crappy libido. She's not bored of sex. She's bored of sex with the same person over and over and over and over and over and over. It's not your fault. It has nothing to do with your dick size. It has nothing to do with how you eat her out. It has nothing to do with anything at all. It's just how she is. So I beg of you, your girlfriend or your wife goes off sex, move into different houses. No, I'm kidding. That's not practical. But you know what? What Marchamiana found is that, you know how we always think like, oh, women, they want to put a ring on it right away. And then the guy's just like, oh. Or like women, they want to like move in together right away and just be all cozy. And that's the way they get off. That's so good for them. No, Marchamiana discovered that that is untrue. And that the truth is that women's libidos get dampened by domesticity and familiarity and like baby talk and shit like that. Don't do that with women. Don't leave your dental floss out. Don't forget to flush the toilet. She's in the lane and then she's out of the lane. So between women normally born between years 1 and 4 of cohabiting exclusive sex, and this thing about domesticity and institutionalizing the relationship, dampening them in ways that it doesn't dampen the male libido. I know everybody's like, how can that be true? It's completely the opposite of what I've learned, because what you learned was wrong. What you learned was untrue. This is true, even though you're having a hard time wrapping your mind around it. Okay, so what's the solutions? Social science has solutions for you. Marchamiana finds that domesticity and institutionalization of a relationship turns women off. Cynthia Graham, Kristen Mark, Annika Gunst, this guy Klussman in Germany all find that female desire starts to drop when they're living with you and only having sex with you.
Esther Perel
Yes,
talks.
yeah. Esther Perel crossed over some of the same science that I did. God bless her for giving people, you know, some language to talk about it. So Stephen Mitchell and Marchamiana were the people who basically said, is monogamy a grave? It seems like it is for the female libido. And we need excitement and adventure, but we also need security and attention. Well, yes, that's true. What's the solution? If you're a guy, it's not about you. But when you have this knowledge about who your girlfriend or wife is likely to be, it doesn't just set her free, it sets you free. No, this is not about your dick. No, this is not about what you do with it. No, this is not about your mouth. Although maybe you could do a better job with your mouth. Maybe you could more often use your mouth and your fingers in a sex toy, because we know, remember the science that less than 1 in 5 women can have an orgasm from penetration alone. So maybe do those other things, but let's set men and women alike free by giving them actual real data about who men and women are sexually. And that's an example of what I'm talking about, that study by Marchamiana. Women's libidos come roaring back if you offer them variety and novelty and adventure. In a lot of instances, I'm sick of people saying we have to medicate women for low libidos. A lot of times, if you just sent them to a sex party or let them watch porn, or if they did role playing, or if they just really got into their fantasies and imagined they were with a new, exciting person, they would be fine. I do like to say to people who are like, we're having a problem, I'm like, for a lot of people, you know, you can't just have separate bedrooms. If you could, that would be great. And, you know, like Esther Perel and I both joke, like, just move out, right? I think Esther Perel once joked to somebody like, oh, you're not sexually attracted to your husband. What if you divorced him? Which I loved. She's talking about women have an innate appetite for variety and novelty and adventure sexually. We've told them they don't. It was a very adaptive appetite for a long time. It helped them get more robust pregnancies, more people to be helpers at the nest. Read it in my book. I'm not going to get into it here. But what I'm saying is, if you can create strangeness between yourself and your female partner, I'm talking to the dudes now, the straight dudes, you will be ahead of the game. Could you use separate bathrooms? Because honestly, we get so turned off by just like all that stuff. Don't do baby talk with us, even if we seem like we might want it. Like, call us babe, but like, don't do the whole like talking forever, like merged entities. Women need separateness. Show up separately at date night. You know how these couples have date night? Remember date night before COVID? Remember going out? COVID has just killed women's libidos in a lot of ways, because they've been home with their families, with their long-term partners. It's been really hard, especially on the female libido. But okay, say you're a place now where you can go out and you guys want to go out on date night and you live together. I know I'm asking a lot to say, like, well, could you move out? That's not a practical solution for a lot of people, although it would be hot for most women. But you can show up at date night separately. Like, don't be getting ready for date night together and like you're watching her put on her mascara and she's watching you blow your nose. No, mystery, separateness, hotness. Go straight from work. Go in different cars. Pretend you don't know each other at the bar, maybe. I know this sounds a little bit hokey, but women like adventure. Let her see you flirt with somebody else or watch her flirt with somebody else. Give her permission to flirt with somebody else. Not that she needs your permission, but you know what I'm saying, within a relationship structure that's exclusive. Some people feel that way. Whatever it is, make yourselves strange to each other. You can make yourself strange and new to each other again with a sex toy. You can make yourself strange and new to each other with like a role play. Like you're interviewing to be her assistant and you have to eat her out at her desk. I don't know. Use your imagination. How can you be a new person, a new, strange, exciting person to your female partner today? And it's so nice to know that when you're doing that, you're dismantling the patriarchy, chink by chink, because what you're doing is you're prioritizing female sexual pleasure. You're prioritizing what gets women off, and you're redefining sex as what gets your female partner off. I want to say another thing. Stop being afraid of sex toys. The number of men who get in touch with me and they're like, my girlfriend wants to use her vibrator. And I'm like, yeah, what's the problem? And they'll say like, I mean, what a waste. Like, what a waste that she has to use a vibrator or wants to use a vibrator. Like, my dick is here. Hello, your dick is not the center of the universe. It's not even the center of female orgasm. Use that to free yourself to have fun in other ways and not have performance anxiety, right? That's the flip side of patriarchy, by the way. Oh, you get so many good things, but the flip side is performance anxiety. You better fucking perform, dude. You better have a hard dick all the time. You better always, always, always want sex. You better always be in the mood. You better never be sad. You better never feel disconnected. You better never not have a hard on. That is a terrible burden for men. And it can make sex, I hear from them all the time telling me that those expectations, that they're just supposed to be these energizer bunnies who are ready for sex every second. They're like, that is an oppressive expectation. Like, it makes me feel really bad because that's not how I am. So what am I, not a man? It's like me hearing that females don't make multiply. And I'm like, what am I, like not a human female? What? So these ideologies that entitle us cut both ways. And the downside of patriarchy is you have to be a stiff dick your whole life, right? Don't cry. Don't be soft. Don't fail to get a hard on. Don't fail to jackhammer her, even though she doesn't like it. All this is a very difficult thing to do to men, and a very terrible thing. And I see it all the time. Okay, what I was trying to say though, and I'll get back to my point, and I do have one, which is, men, don't be scared of sex toys. They're your friend. Stop with this deficit mentality that if it's not your big stiff dick, it's not sex. Get into an abundance mindset.
And a novelty mindset.
Mm-hmm. Because we know women have a demonstrated, data-proven appetite for novelty and variety and adventure when it comes to sex. It's just that we haven't told them. And so you know what they do? They're in a long-term relationship. Nobody says, oh, did you know that having an appetite for novelty, novelty, variety, and adventure is a normal thing for women in their sex lives? Why, no, I didn't know that. We don't tell them that. They don't know that. Nobody tells them that. So instead of saying, oh, wait, you mean my marriage isn't over? Oh, wait, you mean I don't have to pick fights with my boyfriend because I want to have a sex life with somebody else because I can't imagine having a sex life with him anymore? I don't have to blow up my relationship. What are you talking? Because it's normal that I want to step out. Okay, there's that good thing that could happen if we did that. Wait, what were we talking about? Oh, COVID, my brain. Hold on. So my point, and I do have one, is that we haven't told women that they have this innate appetite for sexual variety, novelty, and adventure. And so they shut down in a long-term cohabiting thing. And then you know what they start to do? They start to have service sex. After years 1 to 4, they're likely to start having service sex. What is service sex? Well, it's as bad as it sounds. Well, actually, it sounds like it could be a little bit kinky and fun, but that's not how sex researchers mean it. Sex researchers mean that service sex is sex that somebody has in the service of somebody else's pleasure. Now, owing to us prioritizing male pleasure, guess how that tends to go in a heterosexual ecology?
I'd say she just opens the doors to his needs through penetration, which, as we've spoken of when it comes to the data, is very unsatisfying for the feminine. And her life's fucking boring, and her sex life's even worse.
You went way beyond where I thought you were going to go with it. I thought you were just going to say, oh, she just starts having service sex with him to make him happy because she's been taught to prioritize male sexual pleasure. And also because if she doesn't give him sex, he's going to go away. So that does happen. Some women report they start doing it after their first child. Some women report that they start to do it after years 1 to 4. Remember, their drop. Some women say that it happens later. Some women say that it happens earlier, but a lot of women in the industrialized West are having service sex. And what a terrible thing to have sex in the service only of your relationship, in the sex in the service only of your partner, sex in the service of the status quo, sex in the service of the marriage, sex in the service of the relationship, rather than having joyful, pleasurable sex that feels good to you and that you want. It's criminal. To me, it's an epidemic. And the epidemic of service sex will go away if we get accurate data about what men and women like to men and women, whether they're straight, whether they're queer, whether they identify as gay men or lesbians. And I want to say something, which is sex research has been so heteronormative. And I hope that you have some men who are listening who are gay men and who will pressure everybody in their world to do more sex research about gay men, because we really need it. Maybe there are some gay men listening and some lesbians listening who will consider going into sex research, because what we know about what happened when women scientists went into sexual science and how it improved sexual science, we know that the sexual science can only keep improving with more queer researchers and more researchers who identify as gay or lesbian, but also researchers who identify as polyamorous or who are in open relationships, or who are trans. So the science can only keep improving with sort of vaster, more inclusive perspectives. It makes me crazy when people say science isn't PC, like the idea that we have to have women researchers or Black researchers, like that's just PC. It's like, no, it's not. We know that when we have varied perspectives, we improve the science, including the sexual science. And that when we have one myopic perspective that like men should rule the world, we get these crappy studies that have been making people miserable for decades and that are inaccurate. Yeah, all of that.
Dr. Wednesday Martin, that was an hour of just explosiveness, science, sex, and everything. And we could probably go for another 9 hours because I find this thoroughly entertaining.
We had better stop because men are not ever ready energizer bunnies, as we know. And so we have to stop having our sex talk now.
All right. Well, we can stop now. I'm actually thinking I want to get you back on, so we'll explore that as well. But for those men, women, and everything in between who want to explore your work, where's the best place for them to find you?
I mentioned if you want to start with something that sort of blows apart myths about who men and women are sexually, I want to recommend something specific, which is my article in The Atlantic called Women the Board Sex. I also wrote something about a natural history of the clitoris for people who want to learn more about the clitoris, which we didn't talk about today, and that's called The Button. It's an Amazon original story. It's available in Australia. My book Untrue is available on Audible and in independent bookstores. And my Twitter is at Wednesday Martin. And my Instagram, which is my preferred social media ecology, is at Wednesday Martin PhD. I am often shadow banned, so you might have to search me out, or you might have to complain to Instagram, like, I can't find Wednesday Martin PhD's page, because we get shadow banned a lot in the US for messaging about sexuality, or for messaging about, reproductive rights and abortion and reproductive justice for women. We often just get taken out of the algorithm or have our accounts shut down. So Instagram is my preferred ecology. Hopefully you can find me there, and you can find me on Twitter. I have a website, www.wednesdaymartin.com, and I love hearing from people. I can't always answer, but usually I get to my DMs. It might take me a long time, but and sometimes I do an Instagram live where I answer questions about sex. So you can go to my stories and see if I'm doing one and send a question, and I will get back to you that way.
Your Instagram is fucking entertaining, so I definitely think that everyone should jump on it.
Yeah, it gets shut down a lot, but I try to keep people entertained. Do you know why? Sex is the most fun, interesting thing. Whether you're having it or not, whether you just want information, whether you want tips, however you identify sexually speaking, the data about science are really fun data, and sex is a really fun topic, and it should be interesting, and it should make you laugh, and it should make you think. So that's what I'm trying to do. So thank you for those kind words about my Instagram.
Beautiful. Guys, that's all we've got time for today. Get around Dr. Wednesday Martin. Her stuff is brilliant, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you. Thanks to your listeners for having a listen.
Thanks for tuning in this week. As always, if you enjoyed listening, please leave a review, give us a shout out across socials, or share with a friend so that we can continue to share these incredible conversations with more and more people.